How's it going? I was asked by a few people to explain a little bit more as to how the resin part of the helmet making works. So, not having any resin left, I can't exactly show you, but I can give you a rough idea. Like, obviously, you need your form. I highly suggest using a silicone rubber jacket mold, because if you're running plaster, it's fine if you don't have a lot of undercuts. The moment where if it's anything that wraps around, that resin's going to cure hard, and it's not going to come off. That's where the silicone jacket mold comes into play. You know that it's very flexible and it's not hard to maneuver around. Now, if you're using plaster or a hard mold, you're going to need a release agent. You can't just soak it, because the resin will just bond right to the plaster. So you're going to need I'm probably going to suggest a spray form, because if you're using like a Vaseline or something like that, it's just all the finger marks of applying it on the inside, or even if you're doing it by brush, that's going to come out through the mold. So you want a nice, if it's a spray, it's a nice uniform seal, and that'll work. But in the case of something like a mask, like I've got my Guyver 3-piece here, which has got a 3-piece mother mold to it. Because of the spikes, I had no choice. But I do have my Guyver 1 jacket mold here. Now, when doing a resin cast, what I suggest is, if you have anything like there's anything that protrudes, like any features like spikes, horns, any kind of stuff, you want to do a small batch of resin. If you've got a jacket mold, put some water in those parts that you want to figure out, and then put it back into like a measuring cup or something like that, and then that'll give you an idea on how many milliliters or ounces you'll need for resin. That way you don't waste anything. But you want to do those parts first and let them cure. Because if you try to slosh around spikes, you're going to get a lot of air bubbles. You're going to get unfinished tips, unfinished edges, all that kind of stuff is going to show. So it's really important that you do those first. With the Guyvers, I have to do the horns first, because it's a very long piece, and it's got that nifty little cut down the middle, and this will leak a bit. So once it's in the mother mold, I'll tape up an area like this, like it's cased in, and I'll get the jacket mold as tight as possible. But there will be some leakage, but yeah, you tape it up that way. It's got less of a tendency to open up and then waste expensive resin. And it's the same thing with anything else. Like once the horn is done, or you got a long piece like this that needs to be done either separately or part of a piece of a helmet or armor or anything like that, you want to do that first. Make sure it's done. Have a look, through it and all that. Don't open it, especially if there's detail on it, because that's what holds it in place. So don't open it. But when you're putting a helmet together, and if you're running something like this has got a lot of detail to it, and I had no choice but to split it down the middle on the back side. So when I go about having this inside the mother mold, I want to make sure that the edges here line up on both sides, and line up height-wise and size-wise. So all the little details, like the grooves on the one side match the grooves that are, like, you can tell which ones match. It's not that hard, and you want those to fit in nicely. Now you might have to even go ahead as far as your initial pour is to, once you've got all that set properly, pour in resin and just get that middle line covered. That'll give you somewhat of a seal. So once that's done, then you're free to just pour in like a good 10-ounce batch and just slosh that all around inside. But be wary of any high details, like my breather units, the control metal, all that kind of stuff has to be done. Pour a small batch and do that. Make sure there's no bubbles in it and let it cure, because it's going to affect the quality of the final product. With the rest, it's pretty straightforward, but you do want, a good thickness. I'd say about a 1/4 inch is fair. It's not too thick and it's not too thin. 1/8 of an inch is too thin, especially if you're going to put a lot of stress on it, or if it's going to, if it's going to be handled a lot. Too thin. It's just, over time, it's going to break. 1/4 inch is a lot stronger. Doesn't have to be a 1/4 for like all around here, because if you have a hard time fitting it on, but you do want a good thickness all around. It just ensures that all the detail work's taken care of, that you have no real thin areas that you could look at and just push in, and then by some bad luck it snaps, something like that. You don't want that kind of thing to happen. So you want a decent 1/4 inch of resin. And like I'm using Smoothcast 325, which cures in about 10 minutes. The thing to remember too is, and I just found out the hard way, is once you get a style of resin, don't mix it. Like I had a little bit of the 326 left, which takes an hour to cure, so I figured I'll just pour in the small part of the tip of the horn, because it's a bit of a pain to do it with the 1 hour cure stuff, because it takes too long to wait. So I poured that, and I poured the rest of the horn with the 326, and it seemed to work fine. And I poured the 325 on the inside and all that. And when I demolded, I noticed this nice little seam all around the horn, and I gave it a quick snap, and the thing just peeled right off, pulled off. So those two resins do not mix. Like, they'll appear as to they've bonded, they don't. So, and I wish I knew that before I actually did this thing, because it would have, saved me a lot of wasted material. That helmet was a complete waste, and that's it's almost half a tin of resin, which really sucks. But lesson learned. If you're using pigments, if you're coloring your resin, and you're thinking, well, how am I going to tell how thick it is? Take a high-powered flashlight, like a high-end xenon bulb, anything, a good bulb. Shine it in, you'll see, because it'll be translucent still at that stage, that you can see the silicone rubber underneath, and you'll have an idea of how thick it is. So just use the flashlight and go in. It's not that hard. Other than that, I hope that's answered some of your questions, and if not, be specific. More than happy to help, but be specific. Thanks.